Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Looks like we are live, so let's go ahead and get started. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and welcome to the Water Finance and Management webinar series. This is Andrew Farr here, Managing Editor of the journal Water Finance and Management, and we have another excellent webinar for you this afternoon. Today's topic, taking financial risk out of the metering equation, how the city of Gonzales, Louisiana simplified its complex metering upgrade. Presented this afternoon by UMS, Utility Metering Solutions. And we're going to get a little bit more into our topic here in just a moment. I just want to go through a couple housekeeping items. First off, you should see a poll question popping up on your screen right now. If everyone wouldn't mind answering that, we would very much appreciate it. This is just to help us get a better idea of who is online with us today. If you could just answer that and click that blue return to presentation button. And I also want to mention questions. I'm going to introduce our two presenters here in just a second. And following their presentation, we're going to do some Q&A. I know today's topic, we're covering metering, and there's usually a lot of questions. If anyone has any questions throughout, feel free to submit those questions in the questions box you should see on the left-hand side of your screen. You don't have to wait until the end. We're going to be monitoring the questions as they come in, and then, as I said, once we move into our Q&A, we will go through as many as we can. So as I said, our topic, taking financial risk out of the metering equation, how the city of Gonzales simplified its upgrade. I'd like to welcome first Jacob Jasperson, Senior Advisor with UMS. Jacob is going to present first for us. He works with utilities and municipalities to help them identify their business objectives and needs and implement solutions that provide best resolutions for their needs. He has worked in the municipal utility industry for over 12 years, working for both meter and technology manufacturers, as well as system integrators and consultants. And then a little bit later on, we're going to be joined by Jackie Ballman, Chief Engineer with the City of Gonzales, Louisiana. Jackie is a professional civil engineer. She graduated from Louisiana State University in 2000 and began her career designing residential and commercial developments. For the past 12 years, she's been with the City of Gonzales and served as their Chief Engineer, managing municipal stormwater, drinking water, wastewater, natural gas, municipal building, disaster recovery, and roadway infrastructure projects. So Jacob and Jackie, it's a pleasure to have both of you with us this afternoon. Jacob, I believe you're going to kick things off for us. So whenever you're ready, I will go ahead and turn things over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. And good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate everybody hopping on the webinar this afternoon and taking the time to talk through this topic with us. So Jackie and I are going to talk a little bit more in depth about how this metering as a service topic or concept can help take the financial risk out of these complex advanced metering infrastructure upgrade programs. And one of the topics we're going to hit on a lot today is the complexity that these AMI upgrade programs have, and I think it's a lot more complex, and Jackie will talk a little bit about this in her portion of the presentation, but it's a lot more complex than just simply putting meters in the ground. And so for that reason, we're going to hit on a couple of different areas, and this presentation is actually building on a three-part series that my friend and colleague Joey Mitchell wrote last year for OpFlow, talking about planning, procuring, and best practices that are associated with a comprehensive metering upgrade. So we're going to talk today about those different delivery models, and we're going to focus specifically on the financial component. And we're going to talk about how these AMI upgrade programs historically have been purchased financially or funded financially through cities and municipalities, and how some of the new concepts can help maybe address some of the shortcomings with those traditional, financing and funding mechanisms. So really excited to talk about it today. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, I just have a quick question, and this is not a poll question, so don't feel like you have to answer, but when you look at this slide here, which one of these items would you rather buy? The car up on the top right or the disassembled car down in the bottom left? And I think most people intuitively would automatically say, well, I want the one in the top right. But the answer really comes down to three main questions. What's the cost difference? Because obviously, if both of those cars cost the same, of course I'm going to buy the one in the top right. But if there's a significant cost difference, then that might impact my decision a little bit. So what's the cost difference between the two cars? Do I personally have the technical expertise to assemble that car? And I can tell you in my instance that answer is no for me. But if I don't have the technical expertise to assemble it myself, do I know somebody that could help me assemble it for me or work with me to help assemble it? And then the third question is, do I have the time necessary to devote to this type of project? I think anybody on the call that has put together cars maybe as a hobbyist or just enjoys working with that type of product, I think anybody that has put that together could tell you that whatever you think you're going to spend in terms of time putting together a car, add about 50%, because invariably things come up and there's always going to be things that you didn't anticipate that you have to take into consideration. So I think when we look at it through that lens, and you factor in all of the time and the material, the expertise, and most importantly, other projects that you weren't able to work on because you were spending so much time working on that car, the question becomes, what's the true cost of both of those vehicles? So that's what we're going to talk about with some of the things that we've got coming up here. And I mentioned the car analogy because I think it's a good analogy for advanced metering projects today. For anybody on this call that has done or gone through an advanced metering project, I think you'll agree that there's a lot of different parts and pieces that come into play. And historically, for advanced metering projects, the utility or the municipality has been the one that has had to assemble it yourself or find the people with the technical expertise to help assemble it for you. And, I think that the other key thing with advanced metering projects is any project that is properly designed is going to be expensive, and it's going to take time to build and significant expertise in order to do it. So it really begs the question, why are advanced metering projects and programs so complex? And part of the answer comes down to the fact that really when we talk about an AMI program or an AMI project, we're really talking about three different projects all wrapped up in one, right? You've got an IT project because you've got a lot of different integrations that need to go into place. You've got existing systems that need to get data from your new system. You've got old systems that need to migrate over. So it's a pretty heavy lift on the IT side. It's obviously a construction project because you physically got to get the meters and the technology in the ground, right? So there's a construction component of it as well. But I think the piece that people often miss when you talk about these AMI programs is the business transformation piece. And what I mean by that is if you install an AMI program and you use it to do business in the exact same way tomorrow that you did business today, then you're really not taking advantage of the full functionality of an AMI program. And, I think that the technical expertise can't be overstated. The expense of it all tends to be a little bit overwhelming. And that's why when we look at some of these ways that these projects are financially funded, it really becomes a matter of, do we have the money to do this and where can we get it from? So I think another reason why when we talk about complexity of AMI projects, and as that complexity increases, so then does the overall cost of the project. But the other reason that these projects tend to be complex is the relationship between the number of groups and departments that are involved and the integrations into existing software platforms that are already at the city or the municipality. So if you think back to, as a water department, think back to when the water department was just buying manual or touch read meters, and who was generally responsible for making that purchasing decision? Well, normally it was just the meter shop manager because that decision didn't impact other departments or groups across the city. So when you fast forward now to AMI, you've got integrations into a billing platform, into a GIS platform, CIS, SCADA, customer portals, all with different department owners and all with different stakeholders involved in the decision-making process. So what that's led to is not only an increase in complexity, but also an increase in scrutiny. And when we talk about scrutiny and we talk about purchasing in general, invariably it leads to the discussion of procurement planning and how do we ultimately end up buying these products and services. And I think a lot of utilities have a tendency to think that the way that they've always bought these products is the way that they're going to have to buy them in the future. And the reality is there are a number of different procurement methods that are out there that can be used for these types of projects, all of which have their own pros and cons. And the only thing that I would just mention is just because you've always procured meters or metering technology through a bid or RFP doesn't mean that that's the only option that's available to you. So what you want to do is you want to focus on procurement being driven, the procurement strategy that you use for these types of products being driven by your planning and overall goals and objectives, not the other way around. So, I can't tell you how many times I've heard a utility or a water superintendent say to me, well, procurement said we have to procure it this way, or we've always done it that way. And I think that for a lot of people, this is going to be unlike any other project that you ever do because of all the things that we've already talked about. So it's worth a little bit of extra time on the front end, and we'll talk about some of the strategies and some of the different options that are out there in some subsequent slides. But it's worth a little bit of time on the front end to do the planning and figure out how you want to buy, and then as soon as possible include some of those key stakeholders from procurement and finance and legal right out of the gate so that everybody can get on the same page. And what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have a situation where the procurement department is impacting your ability to address this project holistically and adding additional complexity to an already complex project. So I think when we talk about different ways to purchase advanced metering project upgrades, the one thing that can't be overlooked is the fact that this is not the only project as a city that you've got going on, right? So from water main breaks to water treatment plant constructions or fixes, water tower maintenance, fixing hydraulic pumps and other things that break as they go down, there's a number of competing priorities for capital dollars and also for internal resources. And so the challenge is all of these competing priorities are no less important than your metering project. But what ends up happening is because a lot of these projects are more visible, top of mind, and appear to have a much more immediate need, what ends up happening is these projects take priority over a metering upgrade. And, I think the tendency is to look at a metering system that's in place and say, well, we know that there's upgrades that are needed for it, but it's been working fine so far. It can continue to operate for the next 1 to 5 years. So speaking of metering upgrades, let's talk about a few ways that cities and municipalities have historically gone about purchasing these types of projects. So probably the most common way that large AMI projects have been budgeted for in the past is through capital improvement plans. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with the capital improvement process and planning process, so I don't need to explain it to you guys, but I think the key thing with this type of plan is that obviously this is not something that can be done within a week, a month, even a year, right? This is generally something that is planned out at least 1 year and more often than not 3 to 5 years ahead of time. So it's very difficult to get something in the capital improvement plan that hasn't been budgeted for and thought about for the last 3 to 5 years. And, I think that it's not something that can be done this way through an accelerated timetable. And oftentimes the key to including something in a capital improvement plan is making sure that there is a good positive ROI and payback for these projects. And while in many cases AMI projects can give you that, I think that there's a lot of instances where the payback period is maybe longer than some of the other projects that you might be including in a capital improvement plan. And therefore, again, these metering projects have a tendency to get a backseat to some of the other projects that are out there. Another way that a lot of utilities have and municipalities have done at least a partial payment for some of these programs is through the state revolving fund. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the state revolving fund program, it's actually a part of the Safe Drinking Water Act that was established by a 1996 amendment to really help provide financial assistance to water systems and states to help them achieve the health protection objectives of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so the way that it works is that Congress will appropriate funding, federal funding for the state revolving fund, and then the EPA will be responsible for awarding grants to each state based off of the needs. So what happens is each state submits a need assessment to the EPA, talking about all the projects that they've got to work on in order to be compliant with the Safe Drinking Water Act. They'll take a look at that, review it, and then they'll apportion out funding based off of state need. And then the state also is going to do a 20% match in order to contribute to that fund. So there's a lot of really good projects that you can do within the state revolving fund. The challenge is that it's got to fall into one of the eligible categories. Fortunately, metering upgrades and advanced metering upgrades do, but it obviously is competing against other types of projects within that state revolving fund. And then additionally, each state is responsible for the operation of that revolving fund, and generally what they'll do is they'll provide additional requirements for these projects in order to make sure that they're either Buy American or Made in America, those types of things. So there's a lot of requirements that go into projects that get funded through the state revolving fund. Grants are also a very popular way that projects can be funded. There's a number of grant options out there depending on your utility or municipality. So for example, the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation grant provides grants to small, underserved, disadvantaged communities, and it has a particular focus on reducing lead in drinking water. So if you happen to be a small community that has very old meters that would have been installed prior to the low lead laws being implemented, you likely could take advantage of a WIN grant to replace those meters in your system. But again, there's very specific requirements that go along with that, and eligibility is, in all of these cases, going to be determined on a case-by-case basis. Most large capital projects, and in particular advanced metering projects like these, are generally funded by bonds. And again, everybody's here familiar with bonds, so I'm not going to dive into details, but I think everybody here also knows that the more bonds that you take out, the bigger the impact to your credit rating, and credit rating will be an ability to get financing and additional bonds down the road. The other caveat with bonds is that in most cases, the utility has to control the asset for the entire life of that asset in order to qualify for the municipal bond. So again, very common way to fund some of these projects, but like all of these ways, there are pros and cons. And then the last way that we'll talk about that is a traditional way to fund some of these advanced metering projects is various government programs that are out there. And there's government programs that at both a federal and state level can provide assistance to utilities looking to upgrade their water system. The most recent example of that is the American Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And this was passed about a year or so ago, and in total provided about $550 billion in spending on infrastructure over the next 5 years. So of that $550 billion, about $50 billion was allocated for clean water infrastructure, which included something like $23 billion for state revolving funds. I think it was about $15 billion for lead service line replacements, probably $8 or $10 billion in there for addressing PFAS in the water systems, and about $3 billion to support water infrastructure in tribal communities. So, but again, much like we talked about earlier with state revolving funds, there's often additional requirements imposed by the federal or state government as to what you can buy and how you can pay for it. So this leads to the question then of of all the traditional ways, and there's a lot of ways that we can finance some of these projects and fund some of these upgrade projects. But now that we've talked about some of the traditional ways, I want to pivot to another model that's gaining momentum in the industry. And the reason it's gaining momentum is because it allows utilities and municipalities to modernize and update their infrastructure, while at the same time not being beholden to some of the downfalls or pitfalls of their traditional financing approach and jumping through the hoops of government grants, getting money through the bond market. So the question really becomes, if you as a utility or you as a municipality could subscribe to a service level agreement that would include things like 100% accurate meter reads, interval reading data, all the benefits that you get from an AMI or advanced metering infrastructure program. And the flip side to that is, if the service provider didn't produce the desired outcomes you could cancel, would that be something that your utility would be interested in looking at? And for a lot of utilities, the answer has been yes. And so this has been what's driving the metering as a service model that we're going to talk a little bit more about. And so, I think for anybody that's familiar with the as a service model, you've got software as a service, which is fairly ubiquitous at that point. But just like the software as a service transition, utilities started to look for alternatives rather than just owning the entire system end to end. And for a lot of utilities, just like it was in the software as a service space, the metering as a service space is a great option for those types of utilities that maybe don't have large capital budgets that they can spend on projects, or just aren't interested in owning that asset and simply want to subscribe to get the outcomes that they want. And of course, this is not something that's new in the market in general. The as a service or subscription-based models have been out there for quite some time, but in the metering market, in the utility space, it is something that's a little bit newer. So we're going to dive into some of the additional details on it. But I think if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this presentation, when we're talking specifically about metering as a service, it's that you're buying outcomes, you're not buying products. And what I mean by that is, rather than paying for a specific product or a specific type of product, you're really paying for the business outcome or the business objective that you want to get on that. And so, I think anybody here that's been involved with an AMI project knows there's a great deal of risk that is associated with it. In general, or historically, most of that risk has fallen to the utility, because you guys are the ones that are procuring, owning, and maintaining the system throughout the course of its useful life. And so if something goes wrong, it falls squarely on the utility shoulders to address it, fix it, or figure out what the legal ramification of that product not working the way it's supposed to be is. But with almost all service contracts, the interesting thing is that the risk is shared, and even to a certain extent, reduced or eliminated from the utility altogether. So big risk on the capital side. Obviously, for these projects, you've got a huge chunk of upfront capital cost that needs to be allocated for it. With an as-a-service model or a subscription-based model, that goes away. So you have very limited, if any, upfront capital cost. You have, in almost all of these cases, service-level agreements that mandate specific requirements for how the product needs to operate. And so you don't pay for inoperable devices, and if something goes wrong, you have the ability to cancel that at any time. So a lot of really great reductions in risk for these types of projects. And I think if you think about it from a financial standpoint, what that really allows you to do, because you're not taking out a bond or you're not going out and raising money from the bond market, there's no negative impact to your bond or credit rating. And it saves those dollars, those capital dollars that you need to use bonds to get for other projects that we talked about earlier, those competing projects that we talked about earlier. And the other thing is, as anybody knows who's done these types of programs, there really is a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty with how much it really is going to cost. When you do the as-a-service or subscription-based model, that really allows you to get a predictable monthly budget, and the cost in year one is going to be the same cost in years 8, 9, 10, and beyond. So that really is a big benefit as you're starting to plan out for future years what your expenditures are going to be. You have the reliability and the predictability to know what that cost is going to be on your metering program side. So what that really all boils down to is really a simpler, more streamlined way to deploy what has traditionally been a complex and expensive project. And we talked about this earlier. There's a lot of different parts and pieces that go into a do-it-yourself metering program, and you can see them all there on the left-hand side. I'm not going to read those all off to you, but contrast that to the as-a-service model where you have a single subscription that you pay to one vendor, and with that you get all of the new technology installed, integrated, deployed, and maintained for this advanced metering program for your entire service area. So that makes it easier, not only easier for the utility to deploy these programs, but it also makes it so that you are taking full advantage of the benefits of this advanced metering program upgrade immediately, rather than phasing it in over a year, 3 years, 5 years, because you don't have the capital dollars to do everything all at once. So with that, I'm going to stop talking for a little bit because I feel like I've been talking for a while here, and I'm going to turn it over to Jackie, who's going to talk about her specific experience in the city of Gonzales deploying this type of program and what she saw firsthand with this type of procurement process. So Jackie, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Thank you, Jacob, for that and the wealth of information you've given everyone. I'll give the details on how those decisions, worked here in Gonzales and got us to where we are today. Just so everyone understands a little bit about Gonzales, we're located in Louisiana between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. In 2019, when we started to explore a meter change-out project, we had approximately 5,000 meters. And as mentioned by Jacob, we explored the traditional bid-build meter replacement project. So with our limited budget, we were only going to change out approximately 500 meters. In that process, we did proceed with the project. UMS won that low bid and went through the change out for that sample set of meters. But through the process of changing that 500 meter group out, UMS presented to us a discussion or a possible project about a NetAmp solution. So for us, this would look like a lease style agreement. So I'm going to give you a little bit about the how we got to where we are in this lease style agreement. We had a mix of meter types. So we had manually read meters, we had some drive-by radio read meters, but we were plagued with meter reading challenges. So we are very low elevation here in Louisiana, and several of our meters would remain underwater for long periods of time. We had to deal with traditional issues that probably most of you are familiar with: locked gates, aggressive dogs, all the things that prevent a manual meter from being accessed on a regular basis. So given those challenges, we were having a difficult time getting bills out on a regular basis. So some bills were being estimated, and customers were not able to predict when or what their bill would look like. We had limited staff, so our meter reading process had just gotten further and further behind. We attempted to contract a meter reading company as a solution, but we experienced really high turnover with the contract workers and even worse data quality, which led to more rereads and even worse inaccurate billing. So as you can tell, our inaccurate billing cycle was just getting worse and worse and worse. So through looking at this NetAmp solution, we we were given the opportunity to enter into a 10-year lease style agreement. So at this point, we are presented with replacing all of the meters at one time for one price. Implementing this smart meter project was going to give us a solution that was consistent and accurate data. And of course, these items listed on the slide, we were going to reduce our meter reading time, which we proved to reduce by 71%, improved our billing accuracy, and we totally eliminated those manual reading errors. We ensured we were going to get our customers an accurate bill at the same time every month. It minimized our labor and our gas and our vehicle maintenance, which I'll mention is an environmentally friendly side effect, that we have not actually captured the cost benefit of this piece of the project. So we have now removed vehicles from the road, we've removed their vehicle idling time, and we're actually reducing emissions through having smart meters throughout the entire system. So although we know now we're capturing that lost revenue and we're making customers happy, we're also creating a greener solution. So the customer satisfaction piece is another piece that is really not measurable in the typical financial model. We had very unhappy customers and lots of customer calls plaguing the office every month. Those calls were consuming our utility staff and just completely inundating our elected officials with complaints. So implementing this project reduced those calls drastically and provided a sense of accuracy and security to the customers that is really unmeasurable. But another positive impact of the project was now the customers were able to see their water usage in real time through an app and detect leaks really rapidly, thus reducing water losses that the system we would experience and eliminating the customer from having an excessively high bill, which would typically lead to additional calls to the front office. So I want to tell a brief story about a leak detection situation that happened upon the first 2 weeks of this project being implemented. We had in our daily routine, our staff would run a leak detection report. Within the first 2 weeks of having a large majority of the meters online, a residential account is being flagged as using hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water a minute. It was a massive amount. So the staff calls that customer, there's no answer. They do some investigation and find out the customer is in Europe for a 2-week vacation. So a major water line into a very large pool had ruptured and was draining into a water body behind the home. So there was no ponding water for anyone to notice or identify that there was a problem. Had we not had a smart meter project implemented and that leak detection reporting, the customer would have gotten an extremely high bill and we would have lost water for more than 2 weeks, 30 days until we had read the bills again, if we even had gotten to his meter. We had gotten a new meter reading and analyzed it and realized that that leak had been there for quite some time. So that's just another way that we have saved money through reducing leaks, thus reducing the amount of water that we produce and waste. I want to talk a little bit about the cost, the implementation of the project. So when we upgraded our 5,000 endpoints to a fixed monthly subscription, we did retrofit some meters and we did some full meter replacements, but our agreement was a set price per meter per month, and it was calculated obviously based on our system and the infrastructure needed to convert our meters. So this number is unique to Gonzales, but our number was $5.25 per month. So what we did as a city, our council passed this cost to the customer. They took action and implemented what we call a technology fee, and we produced this public information campaign telling the customers that this small fee would guarantee a set bill each month. It would be very reliable. The date of the bill would be very routine, and your actual reading would be accurate. Since we had experienced so many customer complaints, we did not receive more than 10 or 11 complaints about this new fee. We were giving the customer an app access to their water usage. They would be able to analyze what usage they had, identify leaks, and this sense of security in our ability to provide a reliable bill each month. So I was shocked at the limited number of complaints we did receive. And even after explaining to the customers what we were going to accomplish with the monthly fee, less than a dozen calls, those folks were not as upset after hearing what they would receive in return. So from 2019 to the present day, we have continued to maintain the meter implementation with the $5.25 per month fee. And today we have 5,805 devices on the system. So I want to touch on a few lessons because everyone here knows that there's challenges with every project. So I would say the biggest lesson learned is that implementation is the challenge between all of these software programs. And most of you know that the financial software that your utility or your city uses is going to be the driving factor in every decision you make. Those folks in finance, they've got lots of different systems working together, and so you need to be assured that your new metering program, works seamlessly with that finance software. So in our project, of course, there's bumps in every project road. You're going to have challenges, but we had a great team open to communicate through those software implementation steps, and having experts and people bought in at every level. So with the metering firm, with the city utility, and with your software vendor for your financial package is critical through implementing a project of this magnitude. So selecting the right team is extremely important to ensure that the process of deploying meters, because it happens, slowly over time, actually goes smoothly. And the other piece of this I would say is that city staff and our utility staff really had to buy into the project in order to achieve success. So it takes a village to implement something of this magnitude. Just like Jacob mentioned, all these different factors come into play, but lots of people come into play. And so making sure all those people communicate seamlessly and are willing to address challenges as they pop up is really critical to your success. So I do see a question here I'd like to answer quickly. So does the $5.25 fee just cover the monthly data access, or does this also help qualify the cost of the installation? So that's a great question. Our $5.25 fee is actually composed of different parts. So, and I'm not going to know the exact pieces as I give you this, but I'll give you an example. So let's say 50 cents of the fee is the actual cloud-based data storage, and $2 of that may have been our monthly lease payment for the actual hardware that was put in the ground. And then another piece of it may be our technology service, because this is a partnership between our city and UMS. We're in constant communication with them as we moved forward and continued implementing additional meters. Things pop up and we talk to them all the time. So all of those service fees and hardware fees and communication cloud-based software fees are rolled into this $5.25. But I'd also like to add a part of that fee is our service for annual testing. So UMS actually does an accuracy testing every October on our largest water consumers, our largest customers, and commercial accounts to ensure that that meter is still accurately reading, to ensure we're not losing revenue. Upon an initial investigation of our system, most of our meters were at 80% or less accuracy, and we were losing a lot of money. So just implementing the project helped us capture lost revenue, and having this service ensures we're not losing revenue as we move into the future. So I don't want to take any additional time from Jacob. I will turn it back over to him and answer any questions at the end.
Perfect. Thanks, Jackie. And I always love listening to you talk about the deployment and how you guys went about it, because it's always great to get firsthand experience from somebody who's actually done it within their city. So it's always great to hear you kind of talk about that. So real quickly, because I know we do have a couple of questions that have come in. So we'll jump to the Q&A here in just a second. But if you guys will indulge me just one more quick analogy, I'm gonna see how many analogies I can get into the presentation here. So not sure if anybody knows what this is or not, but for those of you that are fans of Formula One like myself, I posed the question, how is Formula One like advanced metering? And I will say that I have just recently started becoming a fan. Probably like many of you, if you are fans, I became aware of the sport through a Netflix special series called Drive to Survive. And I know there's a lot of other people out there that have found Formula One because of that documentary. And I found the whole concept of Formula One fascinating, especially when you learn what all goes into the sport. Being a naive non-racer myself, I just always assumed that, if you were racing, you put your foot down on the pedal and you went as fast as you could, and you just did a bunch of circles and hoped that your car went faster than the other one. And what I'm realizing very quickly is that that's not the case. And there's actually a lot of parallels between Formula One and an advanced metering project. So for those of you that don't know, each Formula One car for each team, there's 20 drivers, 10 teams, 2 drivers per team. Each Formula One car has to be constructed from scratch every single year. They're not allowed to use any of the plans or blueprints or engineering specifications from the previous year. They've got to construct it from the ground up every year from scratch. In the same way, you have advanced metering projects that are very often constructed from scratch with different parts and pieces. So nice parallel there. Additionally, when constructed to correctly, both Formula One cars and advanced metering deployments can have huge advantages and efficiencies over other technologies. So both of them will operate more efficiently than they did previously. Most of them will take advantage of the latest and greatest technology, and most importantly, both generate a lot of revenue. The fastest Formula One cars generate tons of revenue for their team, and in the same way, a well-constructed AMI deployment generates a lot of revenue for the city or the municipality. In the same way that the benefits are similar, the challenges can be similar as well. So again, everything has to be constructed from scratch. I mentioned that already. Not unlike a advanced metering project where you're pulling parts and pieces together from multiple sources. It doesn't always come out of the box with a standard integration. And then the last thing that is very common between Formula One cars and advanced metering projects, and Jackie hit on this a little bit at the end, is maintenance. And I think the key to having an advanced metering program that works effectively and efficiently on year 10 as it does in year 1 is making sure that it's maintained properly over the entire life of the system. And so, that's one of the things that, as Jackie mentioned, you talk about these metering as a service programs. That's one of the things that we make sure that we include in every single metering as a service program as we're working with utilities and municipalities. So just end quickly on some of the golden rules of planning here. So, we've hit on a lot of these already, but just to kind of recap, I would say to the extent that you're able to at least be aware of the lowest bidder pitfall. The lowest bid does not always equate, and I think you guys as finance people probably understand this better than most, right? But the lowest bid does not always equate to the best value. And it's difficult sometimes if you're not comparing apples to apples to see what the true total cost of ownership is going to be for a project like this, particularly a project over such a long time period with so many different parts and pieces. So to the extent that you can avoid or at least be aware of the lowest bidder pitfall, don't do it alone. And I think this is where, we talked about this earlier, but bringing in your legal team, your procurement team, your finance people, the meter shop, bringing those people into the planning stages when you're talking about planning for an AMI project earlier is better. The earlier you can do it, the better off you're going to be. Make sure that you have vendors that you can trust. So I think that we are very fortunate in the water utility space that there are a lot of really good vendors out there that have been in business for a long time and really have your best interest as utilities in mind. So I would say make sure that you have a vendor that you can trust. Have the business objectives and the goals of your utility drive the AMI deployment. So define that scope and business requirements up front so that you know what you need. And then the last thing I would say is that, much in the same way that you don't want to go it alone, consider working with an experienced partner. So consider bringing in somebody who's done these types of projects before. And a lot of utilities I know will bring in consultants or engineers to help develop these scopes and specifications. I would say consider working with a partner that has done that before and let them help you get from where you're at now to where you want to be, because we've talked about it a lot already, but these projects are very complex, and the easiest thing to do more often than not is do nothing. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Andrew, and we can get started on the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jacob, and also Jackie. Great presentation. You guys covered a lot. We have a bunch of questions here, and I have several questions that I want to go through just to help us recap a couple points. But we had a great question come in here that I'd like both of you guys to weigh in on. This person here wrote, "We are in the process of," and this is from another water system. "We are in the process of obtaining a new finance and billing software. In your opinion, should that procurement come first before the AMI upgrade?" What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and Jackie, I'd love to get your perspective on it as as the customer. From our perspective, when we kind of look at these projects, we tend to look at them holistically in general, and so I think a lot of utilities will push off an AMI project because of that exact reason. They're either in the process or they're thinking about starting the process of going through a billing upgrade. And I think that there can be some benefits, but I think in general, if you're addressing the entire AMI upgrade process holistically and you're looking at it, not just from a meter and technology standpoint, but also business processes, best practices, integrations with your existing system, it certainly does not hurt to do both of them simultaneously or potentially roll that type of a software upgrade into a metering as a service project.
I agree completely. It's almost like this is, the chicken and the egg, analogy. They need to go hand in hand. And as the engineer here in Gonzales, obviously, if you talk to the chief financial advisor, he probably would have a different answer because, the finance software is all that he's worried about. But I've learned through our project and prior metering projects that every vendor is different, and some vendors' technical support, and I'm talking about the financial software vendor, their financial software technical support varies drastically from vendor to vendor, and the ways that this data will move from the actual meter in the ground and its antenna to, the cloud, it may move multiple times before it gets into your billing software. So each one of those vendors for meters has, different things that they need to happen to get the data to move properly, and then each one of the financial software packages have different variables and all these different formats that need to be set up exactly for it to work. So I would say if you're looking at changing both, it is totally acceptable or encouraged to do that big picture overview and explore all of the metering options that are high on your priority list, as well as the financial software options, and then start to look at how those interact together before picking one or the other.
Okay, and we're getting several questions coming in kind of related to vendors. So maybe I'll just ask this question a couple different ways. First, is the network cell based or traditional AMI? Maybe Jackie, maybe you can weigh in on that, and then also Jacob, if you want to, maybe as a follow up to that, maybe just if you could talk a little bit about UMS relationship with the meter vendors, and is it typically vendor agnostic, or is there a strategic partnership that you guys get involved with?
Yeah, definitely. So Jackie, I was going to say, I don't know if you want to hit the question on cellular or RF.
So our just to share with everybody and be very open, we have a different metering vendor for gas than we do water, and one is cellular and one is antenna based, and they both speak well with data transfer to our one financial software, but our water meters are cellular based. So, and there's lots of vendors that UMS works with, so Jacob may want to touch on that.
Yeah, and it's a great question. So and I should have mentioned it earlier, but UMS is vendor agnostic, so we do not have one particular vendor that we partner with. Obviously, having been in the industry for as long as we have, we definitely have strong opinions on certain vendors that provide a higher quality or better solution than others, right? So we have opinions on those types of vendor relationships, but at the end of the day, we are vendor agnostic and we work with all the major vendors and manufacturers.
All right, very good. Now, like I said, Jacob, just a couple other questions here I wanted to go through just to help us clarify a couple other points. So what about the utility and hosting data? Does the utility have the option to host their own data, or is it all managed by UMS?
Yeah, that's a good question, Andrew. So I would say when we talk about hosting your data, let's just clarify. Are we, if we're talking about does the utility have the ability to store the data on premise in a server with the utility? The answer is technically yes. However, there are not a lot of vendors out there that support on-premise software anymore. But almost all vendors have moved to cloud-based systems where you simply log in and access the data. If the question is, will the utility be able to access that data, or are they only going to be getting the information that a vendor like UMS would send them? The answer is absolutely the utility has the ability to access that data at any point. To help facilitate that, companies like UMS will also send, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's biweekly, maybe it's monthly, but will send reporting and alerts and exception conditions over to the utility so that they have access to that. And that will help them kind of be a little bit more proactive in the way that they address certain issues. But absolutely, you'll have access to the data. At the end of the day, it's your data, right? So they'll have access to it at any point.
Sure. Okay, and another question here, and Jackie touched on this briefly when she was discussing what's in the 525 fee, but the testing, is the meter testing for just to check flow or checking electronics or both? What exactly is that for?
So,
and
do you want to go ahead, Jackie? So there's so many, I guess, touch points between the city and UMS regarding meter accuracy that in the 525, and it's really anything and everything you could think of. So there is a physical accuracy testing where the actual meters themselves are tested for their actual reading capability. But let's say the meter transmitter, the end point, is not transmitting, and our utility staff checks the accuracy of our system health every day, and they can tell if a meter hasn't been reporting. Our staff does go through some troubleshooting steps to make that endpoint report and transmit data properly. Let's say it does not, and that's, we're not getting a reading, so that's inaccurate, or it's not getting any reading. We will actually send those meters in, and then UMS has them checked under warranty. So if it is a tamper or a damage, like a customer cut wires or physically damaged the meter, obviously that meter is not going to be replaced under warranty. But should the meter just electronics stop working, which is really, really rare, I will add, that meter is covered under the warranty through the 10 years of our lease agreement. So we have had a handful of meters, and I say a handful, I would say if we had, a dozen over since 2019 to present, that's probably a lot, where it wasn't a tamper or something ironic happened or odd. So there's lots of different ways where we check accuracy with the help of UMS. Some of it is physical, some of it is data transfer.
Okay, yeah, that's very it definitely clears that up. And Jackie, just to kind of stay along those lines a little bit, sticking with that the $5.25 fee that you were talking about. So I guess just to continue to clarify that a little bit, was the idea behind that fee that it would fund the cost or the majority of the cost of implementing this, or did you use some other, I guess, traditional funding, if you would call it that kind of Jacob touched on, at the beginning?
That is a great question. I apologize that I was too quick and didn't say all of the actual details of the project in the construction side of it. That $525 was completely turnkey. So UMS went out, surveyed the system, obtained quantities on materials. Where were the meters? What size were they? Were they manual? Were they just a retrofit meter that needed a new endpoint? They actually did all of that legwork. And some of it in an older city like Gonzales is a lot of really physically demanding work, digging under bushes and trying to find meters that may have been radio transmitting for years and never GPS located. So they did all of the field investigation, then did the quantity evaluation of what we need to order, and UMS ordered all of those meters, endpoints, all the fittings, then went on to hire staff here locally to be field workers with UMS crew leads that went out and replaced all of those meters without the city staff being involved. So it did not take away from our staff. As most of you know, most cities or utility companies are already low on labor and resources. So they handled all of that implementation physically in the field, and then actually turning on the antennas and making sure they work. That was all UMS. At the point where we got to training with staff, whether it be the field staff or the city billing staff, we were involved in very lengthy training with UMS and worked with their software implementation team and our finance software vendor through all of the implementation process and making sure that those data transfers happen seamlessly. So really, when I say the city or the utility needs to buy in and they need to be really on board to support the challenges, it's on the implementation side, because the hard work in the field really is a lot of heavy lifting on the backs of UMS.
And then, Jackie, just along those lines, sticking with that, and just kind of going back to a little bit prior to that with the planning of the project, I know you touched on this briefly. Maybe you could just recap this again for us. Did you conduct a propagating study prior to installing the AMI network? And I guess my second part to that, Jackie, would be, can you just maybe very briefly explain to us who exactly, with Gonzales had kind of a seat at that table, if you will? When you look into implementing a project like this, who is it at the utility that's involved in the decisions? Is the finance department involved? Because obviously we're talking a lot about how this, impacts the finance side of things. Is it, who with the city is involved in this decision? Is the mayor involved? Does it go that high? Maybe you could just kind of cover a little bit of that for us.
Sure. So Gonzales is rather small, at the time probably about 10,000 people. So the mayor and administrative staff, which the CAO and myself really are at the helm of all of these projects, driving the ship. And so I communicated directly with the mayor and the CAO just at a high level, hey, what do you think about, let's look into this. And once getting his buy-in, and truthfully, it wasn't hard to get buy-in because our customers were so unhappy, our utility staff was quick to buy in at the office level and the field level because they were also inundated with unhappy customers. So we did have them involved, even the meter reader. We had one or two manual meter readers, having those guys at the table all together. Now, I will say in our initial meetings, we did not have our legal consultant involved, and thankfully, we worked through those challenges, those procurement legal questions, but I would advise in any initial discussions about a project of this type to have that legal advisor as well as the financial advisor and as well as the utility, really the boots on the ground, the utility guys and gals that are doing the work from billing to field implementation, because they all have to be involved. It takes everyone's buy-in.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Jacob, question here for you. Does UMS provide some piecemeal services? For example, this question says we own a Badger AMI system and other remote monitoring systems as well that are cloud-based. So do you offer any assistance in analysis and reporting to the utility for actioning, for example, anything like that?
Yeah, the short answer to that question is yes, we do. We have a whole team of professional services that will do both consulting and planning and development on the front end of projects, and then also help with the actual ongoing support and project management on the back end of projects as well. So everything from cradle to grave essentially is the way to look at it.
And then I'm going to just maybe one more question here, Jacob, to another two-parter to close us out here. Is it cost effective, do you think, for a city with only a couple hundred meters or even less than that to propose metering as a service over a self-sustaining traditional approach, if you will? What do you think about that? And then as a part two to that, what is the largest water system that you've converted over to your service? And maybe just, I guess, overall, talk a little bit about the scalability of it.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'll say we have utilities that we've done metering as a service for. The smallest one we've done is, I think, 72 total services. The largest is, well over 100,000. So it really is, I'll say, irrespective of size. I think that the question becomes more of a question around internal resources and ability for a water system of any size really to be able to support this type of a program by themselves. So I will say the math gets a little bit trickier when you're talking about smaller services, right? Because you don't need as many internal resources to service an AMI system when you're talking about 100 or maybe even less in terms of number of services. So the math gets a little bit tricky, but those are all things that, as we're going through the planning process, we would work with the utility to really figure out, okay, where does this make sense for you? And if the answer is it doesn't for that particular utility, then, there are still ways that you can leverage the benefits of the metering as a service by using a company like UMS to help with planning and the installation and some of the ongoing maintenance as well. So short answer is yes, it can be cost effective. The longer answer is it kind of depends a little bit on each individual use case.
All right. Well, very good, Jacob, Jackie. Thank you again to you both. We had many great questions. A couple here that we didn't get to, and so I just wanted to let our audience know we will work with Jacob and Jackie to get these addressed offline if there's anything that we didn't get to. Thanks to all of our attendees for joining us today and everyone who registered for this webinar. I'd like to thank UMS once again for sponsoring this webinar. And I know this is a topic, as I mentioned at the top. Metering topics usually draw a lot of questions. There's a lot of different angles on both the operations side and the finance side, as we talked about today. There's a lot that goes into maintaining your distribution system, and so it's a pretty big task for utilities, and a lot of it going on in the sector right now. So these are all really important topics. Once again, if anybody missed anything today, if you'd like to refer back to anything, this webinar will be archived on our website, waterfm.com, if there's anything you missed. So with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. Once again, Jacob, Jackie, thank you guys again for joining us, and we'll see everybody on our next Water Finance and Management webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.